Welcome to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. My name is Bob Schlehuber. I'm here with my co-host, Michelle Whitty.
That's me.
Get ready to go against the grain. We got a big show for you all today. It's Friday, October 8th, 2021. Excited that you would be here with us. A beautiful day here in the nation's capital. We have a lot to talk about, including a very strange vote in the UN on a war crimes investigation into Yemen. We'll be talking about the White House's new cyber regulations for industry and whether they're going to be enough to protect the U.S. energy system. And we'll talk about the CIA's new China mission and what exactly an American submarine ran into. In our second hour, we'll be talking Iron Domes, a little bit about Facebook spying on China, and our weekly Working for the Weekend segment. We throw away the NFL and French priest. Well, most priests for the case, but specifically the French ones today. Joining me for this adventure, the one and only Michelle Whitty.
Yay. The NFL and French priest. Just a classic combination there.
Just right at them. Yep. Yeah. Neither of whom.
How you doing today, Bob?
Yeah, I was going to say neither of whom should be playing. I don't know.
Okay.
There's something in there.
Yeah.
How are you doing today, Michelle? Big show ahead of us. You got some gas left in the tank to close out the week here?
I think I have a little bit. I refueled on wholesomeness by watching the first episode of the Great British Bake Off last night, the first episode of the new season. So I feel like that's enough to tide me over to the weekend.
I know you don't like to promote yourself, Michelle. You're very humble, but a great baker, one Michelle Whitty. Some online tutorials there for people interested on how to make some good bread.
I baked a loaf of bread this morning, Bob.
All right. Well,
and I'm going to bake another one tomorrow morning that I'm going to start as soon as the show's over.
Well, guess who will be by tomorrow to pick up a fresh loaf of bread? Michelle, we got a few headlines we wanted to start the show with here before we bring you a great lineup of guests. The Senate voted 50-48 Thursday evening to extend the nation's debt limit through early December after Democrats and Republicans reached a deal to avert economic disaster. I'm going to underline again, disaster, following weeks of partisan deadlock over the issue.
Let me just ask you for a little clarity, Bob.
Sure.
You are obviously talking about December 2022 or December 2023 and not the December that's like 6 weeks away at this point.
Yes, exactly, Michelle. You've gotten on to where we're going here. Of course, we're talking about 2021. Yes, Democrats and Republicans are doing victory laps today, wanting to be pat on the back for avoiding hitting the debt ceiling by 6 weeks. 7 weeks if we're generous. December 3rd, Michelle, is where the nation's debt limit now is. And I say crisis, I underline that disaster, because how do you think it's a good thing to avoid a disaster by all of 7 weeks? Like, that's absolutely ridiculous. And again, it's just not even that much what they're having to do here. Raise the debt ceiling. It's money you've already committed. CNN said, according to people familiar with negotiations, that will increase the debt ceiling by $480 billion. Of course, there was pettiness throughout the whole process between the country's two parties. Ahead of the final vote Thursday evening, the Senate voted to break a filibuster on an agreement to raise the debt ceiling, which needed 60 votes to succeed. The tally was 61-38. Republican senators provided 11 votes, which when combined with those of members of all the Democratic caucus, got the Senate over the procedural hurdle. After that vote, Chuck Schumer blamed Republicans in his speech for nearly pushing the nation into default and rebuked their handling of the issue, saying, quote, Republicans played a dangerous and risky partisan game, and I'm glad that their brinkmanship did not work. For the good of America's families, for the good of our economy, Republicans must recognize in the future that they should approach fixing the debt limit in a bipartisan way. This, of course, really upset Democratic Senator Joe Manchin and several actual Republican senators who sharply criticized as overly partisan floor speech by Schumer. And are you really kidding me? You had 11 of your 50 senators do the right thing by raising the debt ceiling, and you're upset that someone on the left or on the Democratic Party was like, hey, only 20% of your party did the right thing? That's absolutely ridiculous. 11 people of your party can't all of a sudden get praise for doing the right thing on behalf of the other 50. Corporate hacks, so the government remains open to let these hacks get paid more, Michelle, I guess is where we are at the end of it. I also just want to throw out a quick critique of Huffington Post, because when McConnell, it's how the news handles the bipartisan battle at the Senate. Because it's like everything's brinkmanship, And then it's like McConnell, it was like McConnell went to negotiate and the headlines, McConnell blinks. And I always just feel like everything's framed as like, what a coward. He finally cowered to the Democrats. And it's like, well, if you're a Republican and that's like your guy, and the framing of this media is like, weaken McConnell. McConnell has no spine. What a loser for actually trying to compromise. And it's just like, that can't be the framing. It's just like win or lose framing. And that's like what perpetuates. I mean, the media and these politicians, Michelle, just feed off of each other.
Yeah. And I do wonder, and this is, just wondering if it is more presented as, when Republicans dig in and then, in this presentation of it, cave or blink, that's bad. When Democrats dig in, that in itself is bad. And blinking is the thing that you're always supposed to do. You're just supposed to go in there just wildly fluttering your eyelashes, jumping at every opportunity, no matter what, right? I don't know. I'm just taking a guess. Maybe it depends on what administration we are talking about and what party is actually in power. But some people seem to get credit for digging in and get criticism for compromise. And with the others, it's the reverse.
Yeah. No, I mean, I'll leave it there for now because I did want to also, Michelle, talk a little bit about Germany. What's happening there? Your boy, Armin Laschet, has announced a party congress next week, indicating he is going to step down. Doesn't much sound like a party to me.
Oh, good one, Bob.
Laschet was the pick by Angela Merkel or his party to replace her at the CDU as chancellor, but ended up presiding over their worst ever election defeat. The new personnel of the party would be tackled quickly, he said, from the chairman through the party leadership to the Federal Executive Committee. The victorious SPD, led by Olaf Scholz, started coalition talks with the two kingmaker parties on Thursday, and things are seemingly going well there between the SPD, the Greens, and the pro-business Liberals. Most Germans also seem okay with this coalition. An opinion poll on Thursday suggested that 53% of Germans backed an SPD-led coalition of the three parties, while only a quarter supported a conservative-run government. So what do you think, Michelle, about what you had seen there while you were there in Germany?
I don't know. I mean, this had been discussed as a possibility for a while. And, as is very clear from being there, Laschet, nobody liked Laschet, right? Laschet was, I told you, people described him as a snake, described his entire political career as sort of sneakily being in the right place at the right time. And, sort of intense antipathy to him can certainly probably be blamed for some of the CDU's poor showing in this election. But, it would be a mistake to say that this was simply his loss, right? I think the CDU had been losing vote share in every election since Angela Merkel took power, something like that. So this was the culmination of a trend.
Yeah.
But he did seem to be the wrong person to be in charge. And there has been talks about this personnel change happening for a while. I don't know that it could have anything to do on coalition building. I genuinely don't know. I don't know if it would have had to happen sooner for people to go, hey, look, we'll just get rid of this guy you like, but you still like the party, okay? So maybe
Sure.
we've got a possibility of being in the ruling coalition. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But considering how long it takes things, I don't know. I mean, they are still simply in discussion.
Yeah.
So maybe there's some hope that dumping Laschet will get the CDU back in. I don't know about that.
Yeah. I just want to give a shout out, though, to Armin Laschet, because here in America, when people preside over losing campaigns, they blame the Russians and not themselves. So at least it's just refreshing, a personal accountability for a change.
Yeah.
I also have some.
Congratulations. Congratulations, buddy.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me just slide in one last story before we do bring on a great guest, Kathy Kelly, to talk about what the United Nations despicably, as a collective, our world just did to the people that have been suffering at the hands of war criminals in Yemen. But the U.S. economy here, before we turn to that, the U.S. economy created jobs at a much lower than expected pace in September, a pessimistic sign that the state of the economy is not fully recovered, nor will it fully recover while we're still in a pandemic. Non-farm payrolls rose by just 194,000 in the month, compared with the Dow Jones estimate of 500,000, slightly off their Dow Jones team. The unemployment rate fell to 4.8%, better than the expected 5.1%, the lowest since February of 2020. So again, macroeconomics for people that are working within this system, not the worst numbers at the end of the day. The headline number, though, was hurt by a 123,000 person decline in government payrolls, while private payrolls increased by 317,000. The drop in the jobless rate came as labor force participation rate edged lower. It's a bad sign of people are checking out of the economy altogether, meaning more people were sidelined because of the pandemic have not returned to work. A more encompassing number that also includes so-called discouraged workers and Those holding part-time jobs for economic reasons declined to 8.5%, also a pandemic-era low. Despite the weak job totals, wages increased sharply. The monthly gain of 0.6% pushed the year-over-year to rise 4.6% as companies used wage increases to combat the persistent labor shortage. It's always funny to me, the phrase. The CNBC, Michelle, is like, oh, they had to finally pay more so people would want to work. Our profits,
It's palpable, the disdain.
Yeah. The available workforce declined by 183,000 in September and is 3.1 million shy of where it was in February 2020, just before the pandemic was declared. Michelle, let's jump to a great first hour up ahead for you. In the first hour, we will talk about that UN vote to end an investigation in war crimes in Yemen. Our good friend KJ No joins after that to talk about what a U.S. nuclear-powered submarine hit in the South China Sea. And later in the hour, the U.S. tries to strengthen its cybersecurity protections. And if that's not enough, don't you worry, Misfits. We have a second hour for you after that. You listen to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik. We're live in D.C., and we're back after this.
Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. I'm Michelle Whitty here with Bob Schlehuber, now bringing you an update on Yemen and the world's treatment of that long-running conflict. Yesterday, the UN Human Rights Council voted to end its war crimes investigation in Yemen, the first time a resolution has been defeated in that council's history. The vote is being described as a rebuke to Western nations, and among the 21 nations voting to end the investigation were Bahrain, Bolivia, China, Cuba, India, Russia, Pakistan, and Venezuela. Among those voting against the Dutch resolution that involved 18 countries, that was Britain, France, and Germany, that they voted to continue the war crimes investigation. You have Japan abstaining, you have Ukraine not even registering a vote. To me, it looks like a very odd political combination, and I'm not really sure what to make of it. But I'm hoping that Kathy Kelly, American peace activist and author, can help us make a little bit of sense of what just happened there. Kathy, thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you, Michelle and Bob, for paying attention to this extremely unfortunate and really miserable decision.
Yeah, well, so what are we to make of this, right? I mean, I want to ask first if you can tell us a little bit about how significant this UN investigation was and what it means to have it shut down.
Well, if I can just appeal to my own experience many, many years ago, there were a number of us who were nobodies. We really were. We had been in Iraq during the first war there. It was called Operation Desert Storm. And a few years later, we began to realize the sanctions were actually worse than the war in terms of afflicting civilians. And so we couldn't become a humanitarian relief group. We didn't have any money. Most of us war tax refusers. So we thought, well, we do know how to break a law that we think is an unjust, wrongful law. So let's start this campaign. And we felt that we needed to consult with Iraqis, and I lived in Chicago, and so tried to start to make connections. And well, there was a restaurant, an Iraqi restaurant, and it closed very soon after this. So I know I don't want anyone to think that a current Iraqi restaurant is connected to this story. But I went in and talked to the owner, and he actually gave me the most helpful contact that I ever got, a priest in the it's called New Baghdad area of Baghdad. But as I was walking away, a patron in the restaurant asked him, well, what was that person all about? And the restaurant owner said to the patron, and I overheard it, oh, they're just a group trying to make a name for themselves. And I felt crestfallen. Now, in a way, I really have to listen to that, because why shouldn't he wonder who in the world are these people? But that's why a group of eminent experts, an internationally regarded group set up by the United Nations Human Rights Council, is so important, because when reports do surface, and you know how seldom that is, at least people, if they can appeal to the conclusions of the group of eminent experts working with the United Nations, can have some street cred. They can say, we're not just people trying to make a name for ourselves. We're echoing what's been determined and what's been said by this group, which, they make, I don't even think they get paid, but they make the time to do investigations, to conduct surveys, talk to civil society, write reports. They don't have the time to then do organizing and keep databases and do outreach and raise money. That's up to others. The others need an ally. And that ally for Yemen and for the very brave people risking their lives to create the Muwatana Human Rights Group and the Yemen Data Project, they just found that their lives are now more at risk and their work is going to get more difficult. And it's mean and it's cruel. And you know who benefits? Saudi Arabia and Bahrain.
Yeah.
The worst.
No, I mean, it is very hard to make sense of, right? And, I was put in mind looking at this of the announcement earlier this week by the ICC that it was going to reopen its investigation into war crimes in Afghanistan, but that it would not be looking at crimes committed by the U.S. or coalition forces. And, looking at the sides lined up here, I am wondering if this vote, in addition to being an indication of perhaps just absolute callousness toward what is happening in Yemen, also an indication of a real lack of faith in international institutions, because again, we see on the list of countries who are voting against continuing the investigation, quite a lot of countries who have quite good reason to be distrustful of, things like the rules-based international order. But I hadn't been aware necessarily of, political problems arising with this investigation. And as you say, who does it benefit ultimately? Saudi Arabia. So, yeah, I don't know. I don't know if you have any better sort of way of making political sense of this. If you do, Kathy, I'm all ears because I'm frankly confused. That's the conclusion I can come to is just a lack of faith in the ability of the UNHCR to conduct a credible investigation.
Well, it certainly raises so many questions that I don't have a hope of either of us and all of our colleagues together being able to find the answers to. But I think, when so much of our resources go into intelligence agencies, let's just hover on that for a moment. If people have been filing intelligence reports and making accusations of people and getting them turned into entities that torture them and disappear them or frighten their families or do those, they really don't want people investigating that all that badly, right? So they just prefer to have a green light to do it and to count on it being just covert enough that no media is ever going to muck around with trying to find out more. So, the Saudis, I can understand, are going to say to their highly paid lobbyists, look, add this to your task list, Deep Six, that group of eminent experts, because they're reporting on us. Do what you have to do. And then what people do, I don't know that world. I really don't. I don't know how people elbow in and nudge and, bribe and practice corruption, I should imagine. That's what I would imagine. But what I do know is that through the past 40 years, I've understood better and better every year what Professor Noam Chomsky meant by worthy victims and unworthy victims. And the first time I heard those phrases, I kind of bristled. How could anybody even talk about unworthy victims? But I see his wisdom. There are countries in the world that want to highlight the worthy victims, the people that are victims of the ones they're targeting as the bad guys, and you'll get their stories, and it'll break your heart. But the unworthy victims are the ones that they don't want anyone to know about, and often because they're implicated themselves. And so then the horse trading goes on, and even in agencies like the United Nations. And that's another thing I find so terrible, that if somebody is trying to do an investigation and talk to people in civil society, and they say, well, actually, we're working for the UN, and then people want to run away and say, well, oh my God, that's a politicized out. Don't trust them.
No, it's a serious loss, right? And I wonder if you know of anyone who is able to sort of carry the mantle now that the U.S. has put it down. What other organizations are have investigations underway into allegations of war crimes there?
Well, thank you for asking that. I really trust Mwatana, Mwatana, and Kristen Beckerly has been tweeting her dismay. She works alongside them. And I've watched the young couple, Radia Mutawakil, was actually in New York for a time. She couldn't get back to her own country of Yemen because you couldn't get on a flight. How were you going to get in? And at the time, Medea Benjamin and I were trying really hard to get over to Yemen, and we finally realized, you know what, that's just not going to happen. There are people that have any association with criticizing Saudi Arabia or human rights are not going, if Radia and her husband can't get back in to do their own work. But they did go back, and they've been so brave. And the other group that gives data that's been gleaned through brave work is a group called the Yemen Data Project. And for free, you can subscribe to them, and once a month, they'll give you the update on the aerial attacks primarily. And they had gone down for 2 months, and I thought, what a relief. Nobody was killed no civilian was killed by an aerial attack. Well, they're back up again because I think the Saudis, have decided, you know what? No one's really looking. Let's just continue pummeling the area of Marib and the Sirwa city and its outlying areas. And if people are made refugees, well, we've been doing that for 7 years and nobody stopped us. They're bullying, cruel, vicious.
I think we lost Kelly.
Sounds like we've lost Kathy Kelly there. But
it is just brutal. I'm sitting here just kind of with my jaw dropped, and you always hear this stuff, Michelle, and it's something we cover constantly. And just to think how helpless people, like the people that desperately we can get a missile, we can get a drone, we can get whatever we want to anywhere in Yemen if American government wants to. Any weapon, any type of violence, we can easily export anywhere around the world. But some of our best peacemakers, if you don't know Kathy Kelly, just go and look up Kathy Kelly and her career. And her and Medea Benjamin, who I have great respect to, amazing people, want to bring care, want to bring justice, want to bring human rights. We can't export that. We can't do anything. We cannot get that into Yemen right now. None of that. Food aid, security, peace, no, can't do that. Anything violent-wise, though, Michelle, we'll get it to you. First-class mail. I'll be there tomorrow.
I'm sorry, Bob, are you talking about the purely defensive systems that we have been supplying the Saudis with now since Joe Biden came into power? Although really hard to see a difference between those and the offensive systems that we were giving them before. I know.
No, I mean,
it's the degree to which the conflict in Yemen has really been kind of swept under the rug and sidelined in terms of its media presence is really shameful.
Yeah, I mean, just a preview in the 1 o'clock hour here in about 35 minutes or so, we'll be talking about the Iron Dome, which again is just the idea that it's labeled as a defensive weapon is quite laughable. Again, it'd be like saying Captain America. I was using the analogy of Captain America from the Marvel universe. His shield was only a defensive tool. If you have good defense, it makes your offense all the greater. Michelle, let's take a quick break. Big thank you to Kathy Kelly for joining us to bring us the latest tragic news there from Yemen. We'll take a quick break and we'll come back to talk with our good friend KJ No and what exactly the CIA has been up to within China. We'll talk about that and more. You're listening to Political Misfits Radio Sputnik. We're live in DC, and we're back after this.
Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. I'm Michelle Witte here with Bob Schlehuber, getting into, there have been a lot of China-related headlines this week. So we're going to try and cram as much as we can into this conversation. We are going to start with the CIA's reorganization, where they're adding 2 new mission centers there, Bob. We are going to get into Joe Biden casually referencing U.S.-China policy that no one knew existed before this. We are going to get into that nuclear submarine that ran into something Spoiler alert, guys, the thing that it ran into, as far as I know, still no idea, but ran into something in the South China Sea, which, is never going to be a harbinger of good, calm discussions to come. And maybe some other headlines in between. Here to help us parse all of it is KJ No, a global justice activist, writer, teacher, and a member of Veterans for Peace. KJ, thanks for joining us again.
Thank you. Pleasure to be with you.
Let's talk first about the CIA's big announcement yesterday that, hello, 21st century, we're coming for you. We're creating 2 new mission centers, one focused on China and the other focused on emerging technology, climate change, and global health, as the New York Times put it. And I want to get into the China Center first. It's supposed to help officers collect and analyze information on China and the Chinese government. And the article in the Times, at least, about this announcement gets into some detail about how difficult it has been for the CIA to evade detection in China recently, laying the blame for that on a far-reaching tech surveillance apparatus with facial recognition technology and AI to run things. And it also notes that there was a big shakeup 10 years ago when China found and dismantled the U.S.'s spying network in the country. And so I wanted to get your thoughts on, the mere announcement of this new center and also the CIA's description of why spying in China is so hard.
Yes. Well, I think the first thing we need to say, and this is just common sense, but espionage is not fast cars and martinis. It requires real language skills. I mean, how many languages does James Bond speak? I think he speaks English with a vocabulary of about 200 words and some grunting. So, really, the fundamental fact is that the U.S. does not have the language skills necessary to do the kind of human intelligence necessary. We see that in a series of failures, starting with the 1950 Korean War and going all the way up to the recent Taliban debacle. So that's the technical aspect, but the larger aspect of these types of failures has to do with the ideology. It's this notion that if you have a monopoly over the means of violence, then you don't need to be that attentive. It renders you blind. And so that's why we see these constant inability and lack of capacity to do meaningful intelligence and meaningful research. That said, we also know that, as you point out, that the U.S. network in China was ferreted out. Clearly, they were not doing, the kind of security measures that they needed to do. But ultimately, I think the issue is really one of lack of capacity, ideological blindness, and also I think it's very interesting to note that China has been coupled with climate change, clearly a way of equating an inflated threat or an imagined threat with a real existential threat.
The other thing that I see in both of these centers, right, the China one and this new one that's supposed to focus on new technology, pandemics, and climate change, I'm wondering, it seems like a lot of catch up happening by the CIA, right? And you imagine our intelligence community to be sort of ahead of things. Isn't that the entire point, to be ahead of problems because you've gathered this intelligence on them? And so, I'm not going to suppose that the New York Times is printing everything the CIA gets up to, and that this is necessarily a true representation of how behind the ball they really are. But I don't know. It does seem like a lot of catch up. China's going to overtake the U.S. as the biggest economy, but possibly, by some measures, it already has. Now climate change is a threat. Now, 2 years nearly after a pandemic, now we're going to, gear up to prepare for the next one in the next 100 years. It just seems, I don't know. So I wonder if the CIA has lost a step here.
Well, first thing is that the CIA, the New York Times only reports what the CIA wants it to report. Anything out of the New York Times, is essentially, a sanctioned leak. Let's not have any illusions about that. But regarding climate change, as I said before, climate change, pandemics, these are real existential threats. And that's where we should be putting our focus on. We are approaching over 1.2 million if you look at the excess deaths in the United States from the COVID pandemic. But clearly, priorities are skewed and budgets are skewed in the wrong direction. So as I said before, by mentioning or stating China with climate change, they're just trying to conflate an imagined threat with a real and foundational existential threat. So that's my take on this.
Mm-hmm. The other, I don't even think it's really fair to call this subtext because I think it's pretty overt. But it sort of amounts to yet another declaration that the war on terror is over, right? As the Times puts it, reflects a general policy across the Biden administration's national security team to pay attention to a, quote, new generation of challenges and threats after, 2 decades of focusing on terrorism. And I was wondering if you could help us lay out a little bit of how you interpret cause and effect here, right? Do you think that terrorism is done, and so therefore we are turning our attention to other pressing problems? Or, did we just decide that terrorism was over because we needed an excuse to shift our messaging and resources elsewhere? And it is a genuine question, right? Because it does seem as though, we had a spate of attacks in Europe a few years ago, maybe 5 years ago. That's sort of done. But it also seems like to some extent this is about branding, right? Where the Taliban were terrorists. Now they're just the government of Afghanistan. So I'm wondering if you can kind of, if I don't know, how do you see these sort of vectors of cause and effect going vis-a-vis the war on terror and our new war on China?
Well, the way that I understand the war of terror, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that you cannot wage against a war against terror because terror is a tactic. It doesn't make any sense. And we knew that was the case right from the beginning. And clearly we attacked the wrong countries. And then we went on and continued to destroy and wreak havoc in the Middle East, largely for geostrategic reasons and to keep the Pentagon gravy train running on time. It's absolutely what you say. There's this kind of whiplash and amnesia where we go from freedom fighters to terrorists and then back again, legitimate governments. What are we talking about? This is whiplash inducing. But the way that I see it is that the war on terror was really a kind of a placeholder threat. The military-industrial complex always needs a threat. And even as they were talking about, quote-unquote, the war on terror, China was always on the horizon. It goes back to the 1950s, the McCarthy era, 1966, the McNamara memo on Vietnam, and then, of course, 1990 Defense Planning Guidance document, the Project for a New American Century, 2008, the Pivot, 2018 National Security Strategy, and 2020, the Biden Doctrine. These all have had a continuity where they see China as a rising or imminent threat. And there was a short period between 1990 and 2008 when, there was a little bit of collaboration, cooperation, largely for economic reasons. But even there was a strong belief that China would either collapse of its own accord, these were the collapses, or that China would be absorbed into the Western capitalist order. And so when that didn't happen after the financial crash, then the daggers came out in earnest.
And KJ, I want to be able to ask you about some of these other regional headlines, but just very quickly, wanted to get your thoughts on William Burns for a second. He came into office talking up the threat of China, or in his confirmation hearings that came out. He's a man who believes completely that Havana syndrome is real and is serious, and we've seen the Biden administration acting accordingly. Seems like he is already, making some kind of imprint on our intelligence services. So I wonder if this is what you were expecting when he was nominated to the position of CIA director, and what you think of where he might go.
I'll be honest, when Burns was nominated, I think the peace movement was desperate for hope. And we thought that Burns might initially be promising. And this is based not on a lot, but essentially he said at one point before the nomination, the overarching challenge for the United States, for U.S. foreign policy, is to adapt to a new international landscape in which American dominance is fading. And that is true. And so this somebody grounded in reality. America is no longer the only big kid on the geopolitical block. So we thought, oh, here's somebody who's grounded in reality, he's a realist. But then he switched very, very rapidly to, quote unquote, China's authoritarian adversary. And then he's continued along the threat inflation route that the entire Biden administration, especially the retreads from CNAS, have been. Or if he's just fallen into the doctrine. And so, yes, the Havana syndrome, this is the same kind of threat inflation, but on a kind of individual level. It's really, these are all self-fulfilling prophecies. If you believe in something as a threat, it will become true, both as a nocebo, as in the case of believing that the cricket noise will hurt you, but also on a geostrategic level.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Now, I'm glad we've got a few minutes left to talk about some of these headlines because there have been a lot. Over the past week, we got reports that U.S., I'm seeing Marines, I'm seeing Special Operations Forces have been in Taiwan training Taiwanese forces for at least a year. And shortly after those reports came out, you have the Chinese government responding by saying, hey, that is not kosher. It's not something we consider acceptable. In our understanding. And then you have President Joe Biden dropping into the mix that he had talked to Chinese President Xi Jinping and that the two were abiding by the Taiwan agreement, leaving people to wonder what exactly he is talking about, right? I mean, Taiwan and China have this sort of one China policy. The rest of the world sort of abides by this one, but there's nothing called the Taiwan Agreement. And so I wanted to start by asking, KJ, what is Joe Biden talking about here?
Well, the first thing is nobody is sure on what he's talking about regarding the Taiwan Agreement. Is he referring to the Shanghai Communique, which establishes a one China policy and where the U.S. agrees that Taiwan is a province of China, that there is only one sovereign China? Is that what he's referring to? Or is he referring to, the raft of bills that came out after, which says the U.S., will defend will defend Taiwan? So this is very confusing. It's unclear whether he was just confused at the moment with this deliberate obfuscation or ambiguity. But clearly, the Chinese are not happy about what is going on. They're certainly not happy about, the warships in the South China Sea and that submarine crash. This is what happens when you send in warships like it's Black Friday into, a store. You're going to have a traffic jam and you're going to have, crashes like this. But the special operations in Taiwan, the Chinese know this has been going on. Taiwan's a small country. Nothing passes, observation. But the fact that they came out and said it outright, came out and leaked it when, there's a kind of gray zone agreement. We don't ask, don't tell. That is an ominous signal. And the Chinese are very, very unhappy about it. They've come out with some fairly strong statements saying that we know these guys are here. It won't make any difference. Don't try anything. And all of this is just more a proof of the U.S.'s Jekyll and Hyde behavior towards China. It really is not going to work. And if you continue this way, you just add more fuel to the fire.
It does seem pretty provocative in a place where you don't have even an actual embassy, right? The U.S. still only has a de facto embassy in Taiwan, the American Enterprise Institute, which handles the paperwork and things that an embassy would handle, but it is not officially, U.S. soil. It's not an official U.S. outpost. And that was they built a big new facility relatively recently, so it's possible that those lines have gotten even more blurry. But yeah, I mean, having U.S. soldiers rotate in and out of a place that officially you basically accept as a province of China. It's hard to overstate, I think, how provocative this is.
It is very, very provocative. The thing is, Taiwan buys military equipment, trainers come with the equipment, the U.S. Marines guarding the U.S. Taiwan Institute, quote unquote, the embassy. The U.S. Coast Guard, Taiwanese Coast Guard have been coordinating openly. And last year, the U.S. Special Ops forces were training Taiwanese on small boat operations. So this is in alignment with U.S. doctrine on working with asymmetric tactics of dispersion in preparation for war with China. But it is very, very ominous that, quote unquote, these military secrets are being, spoken out in public. And it's very, very bad signaling. It's good cop, bad cop games at the very least. It's just more bad news. The fact is that all the tectonics are moving towards collision. The plates are moving towards collision, and we have to focus on that. And there'll be minor movements on the surface that will move in one direction or the other, but we need to keep our eye.
Yeah, indigenous training, there's limitations on the technological level of equipment I think that the U.S. will sell to